Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Spunkify here for MMOBomb.com, and welcome to a sort of Q&A session here. We've got Zeke, otherwise known as Zeke. What's your real name?
Oh, no, that is my real name, Zeke Sparks.
Zeke is your real name. Okay, Zeke Sparks, but it says Zeke Cryptic when I'm actually interviewing here in game. We've got some gameplay footage rolling over from a couple different things that we are participating in during this third beta weekend for Neverwinter, of course. Neverwinter being the new Dungeons & Dragon-inspired MMORPG being developed by Cryptic Studios in conjunction with Perfect World Entertainment. Now, Zeke, thanks for coming on here today. We do have a couple questions. I have participated in some of the previous beta events, and I know there's a lot of players out there, especially those interested in this MMORPG, that had some criticisms from what they've seen in the earlier betas, as well as some questions, and I thought we actually field that. So the first thing I want to do is sort of talk about what I just saw earlier. So we saw a skirmish, and then we saw the PvP. And I really like the fact that the skirmish mode allows players who don't have a lot of time, you know, those to do full dungeons, to sort of do a dungeon that's, I guess you could say, a mini dungeon. What do you have more of those types of things? Or are you sort of trying to give everyone a plethora of range of types of dungeons to do in different time schedules?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There is a skirmish event for every single adventure zone that we do. So they are... there's almost a skirmish for every 5-man dungeon, which is where you get some of the harder, more difficult team-oriented content. So we want to make sure that there's something there for everybody. So even if you're not like a hardcore team dungeon delver kind of guy, there's still places that you can go to get that 5-man experience that's challenging and fun. And we aim for them to be a little bit shorter than the dungeon delves. They usually wind up being around 15 to 20 minutes long. And yeah, we spread them out throughout the game, so you get a different flavor of them as you go on, and you get some pretty good loot in there too.
Actually, speaking of loot, do you get better loot doing the longer dungeons, or are you presented with the same type of loot level doing the skirmish and the normal dungeons as well?
The best loot is definitely in the harder dungeon content. So if you want the absolute best stuff at any given level, then you're going to be going into those really hard 5-man instances, or I should say they don't start really hard, but they get really hard by the time you're up into the end game. So we've got a little gradual ramp in difficulty there, but the best content is always inside of those more difficult pieces of, the best rewards are always inside of those more difficult pieces of content.
Now I will say the skirmish that we did today, Helm's Hold, I believe, is the name of it. That actually was fairly challenging. We're levels 30, 31 or so entering that dungeon. A lot of imps, a lot of mobs, a lot of trash in there, all coming at you at once. And I do like the fact that skirmish modes, in comparison to normal dungeons, the mobs kind of come to you for segments of it. So you're not actually having to traverse a lot of ground. Granted, the dungeons that we've done previously, such as the tower or the cloak tower, that was pretty expansive. You had to run around a lot. There was a lot of large open areas, and I like sort of how these skirmish sort of condensed everything into a much more manageable, quicker experience. But it still was challenging. I still had a lot of fun doing it. And when, speaking of fun, the control wizard, which I've been playing for this beta, is absolutely insanely fun. He has got so many abilities. I've never really played a mage in MMORPG. I've always really stuck to just physical dealers, paladins, warriors, what have you. But I find that the control wizard is probably the most fun that I've had with any mage in any MMORPG. And you guys have done a really good job, it seems, giving a lot of, making it a control wizard. It's got the DPS, but it really sort of focuses on a lot of CC as well. How do you go about balancing that? Because going into this, we played some PvP, some domination mode, and it was really fun, but I kept having this thing in the back of my mind thinking, how do you balance that out in PvP? It didn't look like there was any sort of diminishing returns or anything like that on CC. So how does that work for PvP? How are you going about balancing that both so it's still challenging in PvE and you can still feel like you're contributing a certain niche, as in, your ability to CC mobs, without that being overpowered in PvP?
Well, it's hard. That's classes like that have a strong secondary mechanic, in addition to dealing damage are always difficult to balance. So the Control Wizard and the Devoted Cleric are some of the hardest classes that we have to get right. And I think you are seeing and feeling some of the changes that we made recently based on the feedback that we're getting out of our alpha team and out of our beta playtests. The Control Wizard got a significant bump recently, where the way we approached it was we knew that they felt really good in PvP. They had, and we spent a lot of time figuring out how much control for them to have in PvP, because it is, that's control wins in PvP. It's so debilitating. It's very very tricky, right? And so we really honed in on about how long they need to be able to lock down an opponent in PvP without making it just super frustrating for the guy that you're locking down, but making it enough that you can sort of control and mold the combat a little bit, and give your opponents opportunity, or your allies opportunities to get in and get your opponents at a disadvantage. And so we did a lot of focus to figure out where that would feel good, and then where we wound up tweaking it is basically it turned out that we needed to have players have a higher resistance to controls than PvE. So your controls are actually much more effective against PvE critters than they are against PvP players. And that's so you wind up with different times, but the combats feel so different that it just feels right in both cases. And so that's, we just kept working at it until we got both of those numbers to line up in just the right spot.
So yeah, you mentioned the numbers being different. Is it safe to say essentially that when you stun someone, say in PvE, you stun them for 3 seconds, but in PvP the stun only lasts 1 second? Is that sort of how you approached it?
Yeah, basically. We gave once we knew what our target goals were in PvP in terms of duration, we just wound up giving players a resistance to those stun durations and those days and slow durations that maintained that timing, while let us jack up the magnitude so that in PvE you could actually control for much longer periods of time. Because let's face it, it's fun as hell to force an enemy mob to stick in one spot for forever, right? It's only a problem once you start doing stuff like that against other players.
Oh, I was loving doing that. I would chain them with Ray of Frost into some kind of like Death Grip hold. There seems to be quite a lot of options in terms of customization of what abilities you can use. Now, you mentioned a little bit about listening to player feedback. We had some players comment in YouTube comments and whatnot that they felt like the animations were a little bit too stiff in some of these, for example, rogues animations. What was the overarching theme in terms of what feedback you've been getting in the last few beta tests that you've applied in areas? So I know, of course, there's balancing and whatnot, but what have you sort of seen that you've tweaked a lot based on player feedback?
I mean, you were talking about animations. I can give you some specifics on that. The Control Wizard animations, their idle animations, are something that we got a lot of feedback about it being sort of strange and looking kind of stiff and sort of unnatural in the way that they were holding themselves. And so we have gone back and we're in the middle of redoing those. I don't know how much has made it into this beta build, but on our latest builds internally, we sort of changed that stance so that it is not quite as rigid. It's a more natural stance. A lot of people thought that he had these sort of two fingers that he was holding up that looked a little bit strange and forced, and we've been basically redoing that so that it has a different attitude. So even it's not just numbers that we're looking at. We're looking at all the feedback that comes in, and at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, we're starting to get to that really exciting point where the game ceases to become ours and the game becomes what our players want. And so we're now starting to get enough exposure to the public that we are seeing what they like and what they don't like, and so changing and shifting things so that we can make sure that we are making the game that people want to play, instead of just kind of guessing at what people want. So it's really nice. It's really cool and fun to be able to react to that feedback, and and improve the game and make it something that that people are, hopefully that people are just going to fall in love with.
So what you're saying is this is beta, and people shouldn't expect to see what they see in videos as the final product, basically.
Oh yeah, we listen to all the feedback and rework quite a lot of things from beta to launch.
Now, I've participated in some skirmish now. I participated in a dungeon. I participated in the domination mode. What other types of things can players queue up or expect to be able to queue up for in a Neverwinter come launch? I saw something that looked like a race. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. We have events that come around based on different time schedules, and not all of those are straight up skirmishes or dungeons or arena PvP. Some of them are just kind of there for fun, and so that race is actually across some sort of icy mountains, and you'll actually get to just it really is just a race with other players across the zone with hazards that you have to avoid, and you have to try to stay out of the way.
Are you able to CC the other guys?
Not other players, no. It's not PvP, but there are enemies that will try to gum up the works.
Very nice, very nice. Now, I guess my final sort of thing I wanted to talk about is the foundry system. It's active now in the beta, and it's allowing for players to create their own content. How exactly do you see that playing a part in the late game content, as you will, for the game? Because I've seen some people complain that there are players who create foundry content simply to generate loot and not actually present a challenge. And how do you go about balancing what players actually create and what players are rewarded with from player-created content versus what you guys have actually put a lot of time into in terms of making these intricate dungeons with these, sort of difficult to achieve sometimes rewards? How do you go about balancing making players feel like the foundry content is important and that what their contributions are doing are important without it being just sort of easier or the easiest way to get to the end goal of getting a lot of loot?
Well, we've got a lot of experience with the foundry, and we're able to take what we did for Star Trek and just build on it and build on it and build on it and make it better and better and better. So we had it's not from scratch for us. It's nice. We had a really good stable platform that we could build on top of, and so it's definitely a challenge. And it's a challenge that is very worth undertaking for this game. I mean, to us, the Foundry has enormous upsides. We're able to put tools in the hands of the users, and players can tell their own stories that hook straight into our living world, and that's amazing. It becomes everybody's living world. It's extremely powerful. So as far as balance and how we approach that, the biggest thing that we want to make sure of is that when you play Foundry content, you feel like it is worth your time, not just because you're playing a story by an author that you love and that you like, and that's awesome. We love that, and we give all sorts of ways for you to subscribe to different authors and pay attention to what they're doing, so you can definitely develop those communities, and that's we try to encourage that as much as we can, and that's one reason to play Foundry. But the rewards you get are super important, so we want to make sure that it feels worth your while, and that it doesn't feel like you're progressing slower if you do Foundry than if you do our content, and that's a real danger when you start talking about how to stop exploits and how to make it so that Foundry content isn't just the fastest way to do stuff. A lot of times the answer to that is, well, you tune down the rewards a little bit, or you gate the rewards so that you can only play 2 Foundry missions a day and get full rewards, and after that it's lower. We tried to avoid that as much as we could. And so we took an approach where to get a Foundry mission active, it has to be reviewed by multiple people in a community. So you can't just make something and send it out there. And then we did a lot of work making sure that we can look at the actual time it takes to complete the mission and gate rewards based on that. So if the mission is fast and exploitable, it will have worse and worse rewards in it as time goes on, because it will be able to react to the fact that it is a super fast exploitable mission. And I mean, that's just one of the facets that we started looking at. Now, as far as end game content goes, right now, the Foundry tools are only able to create normal leveling content. They're not able to create sort of end game dungeons or PvP arenas. Now we're looking into that. That's a kind of thing that we do want to support moving forward. But we didn't have time to get a system like that completely worked out for launch. So you'll be able to make content for like normative storytelling, and you know, with these couple of systems that we've added and a couple of different ways that we've restructured the rewards, you know, it should be very similar to your experience playing Cryptic content, that it, you know, reward-wise that's in the game, and then you'll be able to pick exactly the style of content you like, because somebody out there is going to make it. So, you know, if you want to do these really intricate diplomacy missions, that somebody's going to make them. It's going to be awesome. And yeah, so we're super excited and trying to make it match as close as we can. But, you know, as you pointed out, it's pretty difficult. But I think we've got a couple of different additions that we've added that'll help avoid some of the worst situations.
So my final sort of concern question that a lot of viewers had was the fact that the MMO, at least in the lower levels, didn't really feel very MMO-ish, in the sense that when you participated in a lot of instances, and then in the respect of going into a zone that's only for you for a particular quest, you know, you didn't see a lot of players, not a lot of players were around. Some areas I did see early on had a few players running around. But do you have any sort of more open world aspects of the game as you progress and level up? Are there a lot more tie-ins to the open world where you can quest with other people around? Or is it sort of heavily instanced like we've seen sort of in the introductory areas?
So the instancing is heavier in the beginning because we have to do a lot of teaching at that time, and that is much, much easier to do when we have a more controlled environment. The game is I'd say about 50% instance, about 50% persistent world. And that is a point of feedback that we heard, especially from our early parts, our early alphas and betas. And we actually added a persistent zone as a result of that feedback that happens earlier than the first one did in game. Our first one used to come in around level 9 or level 10. And prior to that, you were mostly in instances. But we added one in at around level 6, which is very, very quickly after the initial tutorial experience. And we're still moving around where those initial instances go so that we can get you into that persistent world sooner. And we even added a new skirmish, like you did the Straight to Helm skirmish today. That new zone that we added in the beginning, that Black Lake District, we even added a skirmish to that didn't exist before, so that we can get players in and grouped together in a team challenging environment much sooner than we had originally. So, you know, that's another place where we are, you know, we're looking at the feedback that we're getting and reevaluating what we've done based on what people are saying. And you know, trying to open up those areas of the games earlier than we had before. So, you know, I think as we get closer to launch, we will have more and more of that persistent environment sooner than it was before. And now we are, you know, like I said, we're about 50% instanced, about 50% exterior persistent world, and that. You know, that allows us, those instances give us those times that we can sort of hand tailor one-shot events and parts of a story where you can have a bigger impact than you can when it has to be static on a world when you're standing next to somebody who's seeing the same thing as you. And there's a lot less that you can do in that environment as far as progressing the story. So we tend to use those as sort of climax points. So you go through and you're dealing with the story of the adventure zone. That skirmish that you saw is not quite the culmination of that entire adventure zone, but it's about a halfway through or 2/3 of the way through. It's kind of a nice sort of exclamation point to what's going on in that story. And so we try to utilize those instances to to a good extent to tell the story in a way that you can't in a persistent world.
Nice, nice. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us here about Neverwinter. Can we get any sort of idea of when the next sort of beta, open beta perhaps, is going to be, or is that still under wraps?
That is still under wraps, and I'm pretty sure they would take me out back behind the shed and whip me if I started talking about it. So you
Very
can
well. Zeke from Cryptic Studios, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming.
What were you saying?
I was saying you can try to, if you track down Craig Zinkovich, our EP, you can try to wheedle out some of the more sensitive information from him. So I'm not sure
I will have
how much
to do
of
that.
he's, but give it a shot. See what you can get out of him.
All right, I have to go farther up the chain of command, I guess. Well, I really appreciate you coming here to talk to us. And everyone, if you guys want to find more information about Neverwinter, you can check out our first look here on MMOBomb.com. And as always, this has been Spunkify. I'll see you guys next time. Spunkify out. Later, guys.